In this episode of 51 Vets, we sit down with Graham Weaver, the founder and managing partner of Alpine Investors. And 51 Vets, just for everyone's background, is content and community for transitioning veterans. And so for the past 4 years, I've been lucky enough to spend, hundreds and hundreds of hours working with vets who are transitioning. It's just given me so much fulfillment to be doing this. Guys, before we turn it over to Graham for his background, let's go around the table here and just do, your high level intros and kind of, what your ask is, or just kind of what you are thinking about in your life and career. And for the guys who are in the attendees right now, feel free to ask questions as we're going through this, and we'll dive in. But let's start off with Alex, and then we'll end with Graham and his intro.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. I appreciate it, Graham. Thank you so much for your time today. We're super excited to have you on this discussion. Background on myself, I'm Naval Academy graduate by trade, and I've been active duty for about 10 years. So I flew the F-18 Super Hornet for a little over 5 years, and then was fortunate enough to transition to the F-35C, where I'm currently an instructor, teaching new pilots how to fly that aircraft as they get to the operational side of the house. I've got about 2 months of active duty time left before I transition. So just learning as much as I possibly can about the private sector side of things, networking as much as possible, long-term or short-term based on my transition time. I would love to get on the operational side of the house, whether that be on VC or private equity side. I have a lot of interest there. I'm looking at MBA programs and just trying to kind of piece together the puzzle that is one for a transitioning vet. So thanks for your time.
Awesome. Mark?
Graham, thank you, and Jordan as well. Madik Malik, similar to Alex, graduated from the Naval Academy in 2009 and spent 9 years in the Navy as a SEAL, predominantly out of San Diego. Left in 2018 to go right into the full-time Wharton MBA program, and I finished that up this last summer. Throughout the time there, the majority of my focus had been towards commercial real estate and prop tech type roles. And that industry is a little bit on fire right now. So I'd been doing a kind of late season pivot with this summer. I interned with an emerging manager venture capital fund and a real estate fintech startup. And kind of the direction I'm moving now is kind of towards the private equity investing, operating side, and just researching a few opportunities there.
Awesome. Zach?
Hey, Graham, thanks for being here. Jordan, always thank you for organizing these. Zach Walters, active duty, have about a year left, Navy SEAL, out in San Diego. Own a local business here, currently starting my second year at my MBA at Anderson, UCLA. Wrap up in June with that, and then transfer, like I said, about a year left. So I transfer out of the military in January of 22, looking at the IB or PE space, trying to solidify some internships currently, and then occasionally jumping on and helping Jordan out where I can with 51 Labs and 51 Vets. Hugely indebted to him and what he does for our community and our guys. So.
Awesome. So Graham, hopefully that was helpful to get a sense of, where they're at. And I think they're pretty representative of the others who, are in 51 Vets, even on this, attending this now. Would you mind giving just a snapshot of Alpine for that context, maybe, 60 seconds or so, but then like rewinding and just the story that you laid out in the 2 volumes of the email. That was amazing content. I'm incapable of writing more than bullet points. So I'm envious of anyone who can write a full paragraph, much less a book that we got yesterday. And that was awesome to read just how you think through life. But can we start off with just a snapshot of what is Alpine Investors and then rewinding to your life?
Sure, perfect. That's a great way to go. And by the way, I'm going to put in the chat for the panelists, I just wrote the name of someone that you can all contact about what I'm about to talk about, so you can send that out to your cohort. So what's relevant for this group about what I do is I run a private equity firm We buy recurring revenue businesses, software and services. We, as of the end of this year, will have about $4.5 billion under management. I've been running that for 20 years. I've been in private equity 25 years. And we have kind of a few views that are really, I mean, this is part of the, well, first of all, let me just back up. Sorry, I'm getting a little too excited. First, I just want to say to all of you just how appreciative I and the entire, nation are for your service. And when Jordan reached out, I was just frankly kind of intimidated to talk to this group, and but also just really grateful. And so, to the extent that you don't hear it enough, you should. I hope you just know how grateful all of us are for your service and for how you've chosen to spend this first part of your careers. I mean, our nation, our country wouldn't be here without you. And so just wanted to say so much gratitude. And I'm really honored that you asked me to be here, and I'm hopeful I can be somewhat helpful either with the content or with actually a internship or job. So I'll do what I can on my part, but you all have certainly done so much for us. So I just wanted to say thanks on that. And again, I hope you hear that often. If you don't, people are thinking it and they're maybe not saying it as often as they should. So thank you for your taxes. That was a good one. All right. So, with respect to Alpine, I'll jump to kind of where we are now. We believe that, and we have learned from 25 years that really talent is the most critical factor in great investment outcomes. So the management team, we think, is 60 to 70% of our investment outcomes for the kind of investing that we do. So once we buy a recurring revenue software services business, whether that's an okay deal or a phenomenal home run deal, has to do with the quality of the team, and specifically the CEO, and specifically that CEO's leadership capabilities. That's kind of view number one that we have, which is pretty different, I think, than a lot of investing folks. We focus on all the things they focus on as well, moats and revenue retention and, valuation analysis, debt, we do all that as well. But fundamentally, number one for us is talent. And you'll see that on our website. You'll see it in our strategy. We have built our entire strategy around talent. Number two, and this is what's really relevant for all of you, our belief is that attributes matter way more than experience. So who someone is at their core is more important than what they've done. And if you believe that, then you all are actually really the best people to go run businesses, because you're leaders. You have incredible persistence, character, leadership characteristics, ability to lead people, be super clear with priorities, et cetera. That's what really matters in leadership. So leadership's the most important thing, and leadership's about attributes, not experience. So, all right. So those are just a couple really high level things. So what we do at Alpine, we have a program we call CEO and Training Program. We have 50 people currently in that program, and we're hiring, call it 10 to 15 people a year. And we hire throughout the year, and we basically are taking really high attribute people, and we do have folks like yourselves who have been in branches of the military, have actually never worked in the civilian world, and they come right into the program. They work with an incredibly successful CEO who has signed up to train them and mentor them, and then in anywhere from 2 to 5 years, they're the CEO of a business. And we've been doing that program for about 10 years, and we have, as I said before, we have 50 people in the program. And today, and some of you may know this if you've mentioned some of the business schools, we've been the number one most applied for job out of Stanford Business School, Harvard Business School, Kellogg Business School, and we're number 3 at, I think one of you said you went to Wharton. We were number 3 last year at Wharton. We also hire people from you mentioned UCLA, and Chicago and MIT, all different schools. So I put in the chat the name of the person who runs that program, And, we're hiring now and would certainly love anyone who's interested in that program. I'm not saying this to be an advertisement. I'm saying it in the event that this can be helpful in the next part of your career. I guess it is an advertisement.
It is
an
advertisement. The purpose is get guys jobs. So perfectly fine. Continue.
Yeah, you told me that when we started that was, and this is a very direct thing that is kind of lines up with exactly where you all are in your career. So I'd be stupid not to mention it. So I'll lead with that, and then we can go back. I don't know if that's enough. If you want me to say anything else, actually,
I'm sorry. How many portfolio companies do you have? How many portfolio companies? How many people in the firm? Just some high level stats like that.
Yeah, we have. I actually don't know the number. Let's say 20-ish portfolio companies. We have 65, I think, people at Alpine HQ, and then we have another 65 people that I meant, like including those CEOs and training, plus other folks that are Alpine people but are in companies. So all in, we have about 130 people. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm guessing probably for SEC reasons I can't give you exact numbers, but we have been, for most of our investors, we are their number one performing private manager, whether that's credit, venture, private equity, real estate. We're their number one performing manager. They tell us that, and my reason for saying that, aside from that, I'm really proud of it, is that this works. Having really high attribute people, and we're winning because of that. And that it's been really gratifying for me to kind of take a tack very different than what a lot of folks in my business do, and have it just be resoundingly successful. So again, I can't get it. Probably offline can get into some of the numbers and stuff, but
let's dive into your
happy to
background.
do that.
What's your path before starting a firm 25 years later that has over 3 or 4 billion under management? Let's rewind just a little bit. Where are you from, and kind of what's the story that you were kind of diving into in the email?
Yeah, so I won't go through the whole thing. I'll try to hit some things that I thought might be interesting to all of you. So I grew up in a small town in Ohio. It was a rural farming town. It was actually a suburb of Toledo, Ohio, which is kind of in the Rust Belt. Which supplies automotive parts to Detroit. And my father and grandfather were veterinarians, which I had no stomach to do. And the big turning point for me during that time in Ohio was I wrestled for I went to public school, wrestled, and that was like the way, I was a sophomore in high school, and it was kind of the way I could feel important or feel like I fit in, as everyone in high school wants to do. And then I made varsity my sophomore year, but then halfway through the season, the captain dropped down in my weight class, and I couldn't beat him. And so and this was at 150 pounds. And then the only other slot that was available was at 125. So I dropped down to 125 pounds. I was about 6 feet tall at that time, and weighed 125 pounds. And I ate, 1,000 calories a day, worked out twice a day, and I made the weight. I was kind of I didn't have a remarkable wrestling career because probably I was starving myself too much. But the discipline of, controlling what I ate, and being like, realizing I could set some ridiculous goal like that and kind of bring it into my life, and that actually I had the power to do that, really stuck with me. And so that translated to my academics, and then eventually to to what I would do going on in college and beyond. So it was just a really powerful turning point, where it's like, and I'm sure all of you on this call have had some experience like this, where you do some experience, and I know they put you in the military or training camp or whatever, where you didn't realize you could actually do something that you did, and then you never go back to that original size. I definitely had that experience really early, but the biggest thing that it came for me was like, I could set a goal, no matter what it was, no matter how big it was, and I could work backwards from that, and then just the intention of doing that could kind of realize it. I went on to college and applied that. My goal was to be valedictorian of Princeton, which I was not. My goal was to be the number one rower in the nation, which I was not. I'd never rowed before, and I was 125 pounds. But did graduate in the top, say 15 in my class. And I was captain of a national championship rowing team my senior year. And so I didn't quite hit the goals I'd set, but I, came close. And I think just kind of got then in the habit of setting really, really crazy goals, putting really crazy goals out there, and then just being super laser focused on them. You want me to keep going, Jordan, with in Wall Street and all that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Graduated, went to Wall Street, and I don't know what I thought Wall Street was going to be like, but it it was brutal. It was so here I am on this. I had done great in college, and I was part of a team, and the college was just a fantastic environment, and I go to Wall Street, and I end up doing kind of mind-numbing work. I learned a bunch in like the first month, and then I really never learned anything after that. And I did the same. I learned how to build a financial model in the first month, and I basically built financial models for the next 2 years. I worked till midnight or later, using 1.2% of my brain, but doing it a lot of hours. Wasn't a good culture for me, and so it was, and more than that, it was a waste for the firm where I worked, because they were getting so little out of what I had to bring to the party. It was just kind of a shame for all the way around. And the scariest part of that experience was that I became that environment, so the goals that they had, which were largely materialistic, and, you get promoted. Not many people had family lives. Not many people had, any kind of volunteer service work. It was like, you're going to, make money and work a lot of hours. Like, those became my goals like that. It was like, a month in, all of a sudden I'm lined up behind that mission. And, it's just a big thing I learned, you become your environment over time, and it happens quickly and absolutely. And Wall Street didn't become Graham. I didn't pull Wall Street more to like my value system. I quickly went to that value system. And so that was a huge learning for me as well. About when I started building Alpine, I became really, really intentional about what kind of people we brought on and what kind of culture we had. I was so focused on that, like to the point where for the first 15 years building Alpine, we never hired anyone who worked in finance, because I was so scared of, when we're nascent, the first few people you bring on are really determine your culture. So, today we can hire anybody because we have our own culture and stuff. But back then I was so nervous about what kind of culture we would have. So it was not what I thought it would be, I guess. I'll say that. And it was kind of unnecessary. I'll just
Graham,
finish.
if I could pause you there,
I'll wrap.
actually.
Yeah, please.
You were willing to make a trade-off. You were willing to make a trade-off for brand, cash in your pocket, and a couple years on the street. It's sometimes difficult to look in retrospect and say like, screw it, it wasn't worth it. But like, was it? And because I think is it worth it for, let's say somebody is 35 to 40 years old, they're getting out of the military, and they're like, I'm going to go do banking for a couple of years. Is it worth it to suck it up for a couple of years as a platform in either banking or consulting and sell their soul for a year or two, but be around amazing people doing like, challenging work, but you're up till 1 or 2 a.m. You don't see your 2, 3, 4 kids. Alex, talk about you.
So it's a great question. So one thing I didn't say also is I now am a professor at Stanford Business School. So I teach a couple courses on entrepreneurship, and I love it. It's so fun. And I have this conversation. I love that we're having the conversation with you all, and I have this conversation with my students. No exaggeration, I probably have 2 of these conversations every single week. Okay. And it's some version of this. Okay. Some version. The version could be, gosh, if I go back to XYZ firm, they'll pay for my whole school and I'll make this money. And then I can kind of launch, or what you just said, Jordan, hey, for a couple of years, I'll go do this. And is, and that's kind of an endogenous path to make some money, get some experience, get some names on my resume, et cetera. And here's what I would say is the problem with that logic is it's never a couple of years, okay? The problem with that logic is, what if that couple of years is your whole life and your whole career, And you sit here now and you say, no, it's only going to be a couple of years. And, and then I'm going to go do, well, that's not what happens. What happens is you meet people, you become invested in the firm, you start hiring people who then, you've made promises to, you start fundraising, you put your name on it. By the way, you're going to be great at it, and you get promoted, and now you make a little bit more money. And then, you buy a house that requires that money to make, to service the mortgage and 25 years later, you look back and say, oh shit, sorry, I didn't mean to swear. You can bleep that out, but
it's a podcast and vlog. It's not public television. No worries.
All right. Well, you say, oh shit, what did I do with my life? And you think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. Okay. The statistics are just overwhelming. And that's why I spent all that time talking about how you become your environment, absolutely. And so is it worth it? Mathematically, probably is, but the probability that you leave there in 2 years, unfortunately, is very low. So I'd just be super careful about that. And the only reason I left, by the way, is because I went to business school, and just to double click on that, I actually turned business school down, deferred for a year. Then the next year I turned it down again, and I was never going to go. And then the admissions director called me and said, hey, you understand, like, if you turn us down again, we're never going to let you in. And I did some real soul searching, and I came so close to staying there, and I'd still be there. And there's worse things in the world than, working on Wall Street. But I don't know. I feel like you only have one shot to really be your true self and bring all the great gifts you have to the world. And that was definitely not, as I mentioned before, 98.5% of my gifts were not getting used at all in that. So it would have been a tragedy
that you mentioned that, because like I did 6 years, 2 months, 8 days of banking. And the only reason why I left is because they went through layoffs, and we were just about to have our next kid. And I probably would have done another year or two as a shitty banker, a dyslexic, shitty banker who couldn't do financial models worth anything. But that swift kick in the butt was what I needed. But I think that just highlights exactly what you're saying, is that you think it's going to be 2 years, then you go to B school, then you go buy side, then you have a happy life, and you start a company that goes to 10 million of revenue overnight.
And Graham,
go ahead. Sorry.
Touching on that, the panelists did whatever research we could, create all the open source reporting, your personal blog, and some videos that we did. So we got an appreciation for the frameworks and the head game that you have in your approach to business and life. And one thing we wanted to touch on was this topic of veterans when they leave their previous career is very mission driven and purpose driven, and they're looking for that that genie in a bottle to rub, and that's going to tell them what their next career path is. So what would some recommendations or a turn on that framework be for someone looking for their follow-on career and exploring that when they don't know what other industries look like? And then the same thing 5 years after that.
Well, good. It's a great question. And what Merrick's referring to about the genie is, so I'll just share it for the podcast, is I have students do this exercise where they imagine that they found a magic lamp and they rub the lamp and a genie comes out, and the genie says to them, whatever you wish for with your career, whatever you throw yourself into with your career, I will grant you that it's going to turn out great. It's going to be phenomenal. It might take 10 years to do that. You're going to have ups and downs and some really tough time, but that's the wish I can give you. I'm not a full-on genie, so I can't give you any wish, but I can give you that wish. What would you wish for? Is kind of the prompt. And the reason that I give that prompt is that it's what you would do if you didn't fear failure is your answer, because obviously there's a genie, so you don't have to worry about failure. And a lot of times we get so caught up in the 6 inches in front of our face and the fog of war that we kind of optimize for the next, month or 6 months or year. And we forget, like, we have a long life to live and we need to kind of optimize, for that. So that's what Merrick was referring to. So, I can't answer for you what your genie goal is. But if what you're telling me is, I really don't want to do X, but I'm going to do it for 2 years, I just would be careful. I would tread lightly. Now, having said that, I'm going to go out on a limb here and give you what could be or might be a decent place to start for your genie goal if you haven't thought about it. And this is, again, if this doesn't resonate, it's totally fine, but I'm going to take a shot anyway. Just for the hell of it. All of you mentioned, you've all been part of an incredible mission-driven career, and you've led people, and you've led incredible people through some, I'm sure, some challenging, crazy stuff, and formed bonds, and it's been like a pretty intense experience. The closest to that I could come up with in the private sector would be being a leader, being an executive, being a CEO, really leading a team. It's not being a financial analyst. Like that might be actually pretty far afield from that. And the reason I say that is because if you kept in mind long term that's kind of the direction you want to head, whether that opportunity is available to you now, and by the way, I think it is, and I'll come to that in a second, whether that's available now or in the future, like, what if you're lining up your activities now to head that direction? The reason that can be a really mission-driven option is that you get to have such a huge say in people's lives, and like 70% of people hate their jobs, across the U.S. 70%, 70, spend half their waking hours doing something they hate. And what if you could turn that around and have people feel like good and feel like inspired, and go home to their communities feeling like they made an impact and they're doing something of meaning. Like, you can have a huge impact on the world. And it's probably the closest I could get to something that would be, and it's not as intense as what you've all done, but it's probably the closest analog I could come up with.
Awesome. Speaking of which, one of the open source, it's on video platforms, was your speech to GBS, which is awesome. Touches on the genie in the bottle concept, touches on, Dreamweaver and a bunch of other awesome content. So thanks for doing that and making that public to people, because I personally gained a lot out of it. Thought it was awesome.
Thanks, Zach.
My question is going to kind of tie into that. And it also sort of leapfrogs off of Marik's question of, like, clearly you're a very like cerebral, thoughtful, kind of methodical in your approach to a lot of things, not just business, but life in general, which I know a lot of us personally kind of relate to and appreciate. But like growing up in Ohio, where you talked about mowing lawns and brainwashing your subconscious to Zig Ziglar and some other people, which I thought was awesome. Was that sort of what laid the foundation of how you sort of think and approach things? Or do you think that sort of developed and kind of came later on in life as you went through kind of these experiences and had this you sort of built your toolbox of business and had some failures and a bunch of successes? Did that sort of build as it went along, or was that just always kind of there?
Yeah, the early stuff about brainwashing myself with the content was kind of the version 1, which was super helpful, and that helped with like setting goals, working backwards, being focused, getting rid of most things and just focusing on a few, and just kind of pounded that in over and over, which was really helpful. And I ran that play, I ran that play for a long time, and it worked really well. And then the next one was like, okay, wait, now what? And the turning point for me was I hired an executive coach in 2009. And I talked, it was like the worst time forever to hire a coach, because the world's falling apart, and I didn't have a lot of money to pay for, but I, for whatever reason, hired this phenomenal coach who today is one of my closest friends. And I've talked to a coach every week or every other week since then, since 2009. And that's been really incredible for me. And it's not like it happened in one conversation, but it's just the concept of just being intentional and trying to say, how do I want to design my life, my firm, my relationships, my time, and just thinking about it. And like you think about, like, a lot of us are just kind of unconsciously incompetent, which means we're not even asking the question. And so we don't even know what we don't know, type of thing. Well, at least coaching made me consciously incompetent. So at least I knew the questions. And then over time, I've become, a little bit more thoughtful about how who I want to spend my life with, what kind of people I want to be around, how I want to spend my time, what legacy I want to have, or for our firm, what are the levers that are really going to make us successful? What are we doing that's differently than others? How do we look around this corner? Just kind of stepping back. And then I also schedule time, not just the coaching, but I schedule a lot of my calendar has blocks on it, which I invest either with my team and thinking about, brainstorming. And we had a call. We had 2 full days last week with my partners where we just talked about, what we always talk about, world domination, how we're going to be, where we're going to be in 10 years. And so it's a combination of like asking the questions, and then you got to schedule the time. You got to like control your calendar and actually block it out. So that would, but if executive coaching was the catalyst for me, and it's still a huge part of my playbook.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of intentionality.
Can you talk about, like, what did you get out of that specifically? Like, why were they a good coach? And also, like, I think the analog to that for transitioning veterans is like having an advisory board of, like, even an informal advisory board. Can you talk about those ideas?
Yeah. So what did you get out of specifically is a great question. So the first, like, this is the way, I think this is the typical coaching arc starts off like, what problem are you hiring me to solve? And people always start there. I'm hiring you to help me with my business. Everyone always starts that. I'm hiring you to help me with my career, whatever. And then over time you evolve to help me with my life, that's it. It's like the arc everyone goes through. So my first thing I solved was my business. And what I realized in that early coaching, every single problem I had, the root cause of it would be a person. So it's like, I'd say, oh my God, I've got this horrible thing going on. And I'd be like, why? And I get down to, oh yeah, because I got a bozo in this role right here, or this thing, whoa, why? Oh, we got the wrong CEO in this thing, And so that's when we really started getting focused on talent and people. That was the business side of it. But then when I switched to the personal side, it's a lot harder. It's like, what do you, really the question coaches ask is, what do you want? I mean, that's the summary of sort of all coaching. They ask that question in 75 different ways and with great direction. And, but you're kind of getting at like, what do you want? Because most of us probably on this call, once we figure out exactly what we want, are pretty formidable. Like my money would be on you all to go get what you want, but getting super clear on what that is actually hard. And it changes over time too. So that's the bulk of what coaching is, Jordan.
So Graham, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to paint the picture here a little bit with it. I read on your blog, you recently did the Tony Robbins virtual seminar, and you kind of talk about unleashing the power within. And you mentioned a few commitments you've made as you've kind of grown and come along that you want to really focus on. And one of them was you want to delegate recurring tasks and find time to focus on what really matters to you. So it's kind of a multi-axis question, but as I can imagine, as Alpine has grown, your responsibilities have become so large that you have to delegate, right? You have to rely on your people and your team. So you also brought up that Alpine is one of the most sought after firms to join for MBAs, for people who are graduating from the top institutions. So you have the pick of the best, right? So when you're interviewing for that CEO and training position or for any position in your firm, what is it that you look for that is not a statement on a resume, right? What do you look for beyond the MBA that is an intangible asset or characteristic? Because at some point that person is going to have a significant amount of responsibility in your firm. And how can we, how can we take that on board as we transition as vets to apply that when we finally hit the interview that we're trying to get to, and convey that, look, although my resume says I've been a fighter pilot or a Navy SEAL or in special operations, and that doesn't directly translate to working at a firm like Alpine, how can I convince you that I have those assets and those skills that will go a long way?
Yeah, great. So 2 questions you asked. On the delegation, this is an evolution that I think most leaders make at some point, which is all of us get, or most of us get to a point of being in a leadership position based on our individual contributions. So, we crush whatever it is, but whether it's academics or athletics or specific tasks that we're given, and we knock those down. And then as a leader, we start to say, well, hold on, now I'm starting to have to create results through others. And, the instinct is to dive in and save, and, you actually have to let go of a lot of that individual contribution mentality, which is really hard. And it's necessary. And one of my coaches once said that the best CEOs are they're lazy tinkerers, they're putting people in the right roles. And he used the word lazy provocatively, but that's very different from individual contribution. So I still struggle with that, where, what it has to have me as part of it versus it's kind of nice to have. Because if I just do the nice to have, I could fill up my calendar 3x every single day. And so that's what I meant by that in the commitments. And I would encourage all of you the same thing, looking at your days and your calendars. So many of us don't realize the most powerful weapon that we have is our calendar. That's our life, right? That's how we're spending our life. And we don't think of it that way. We think of our calendar as a way to record the stuff that we need to do, or meetings or whatever. Your calendar is a way to actually design your life, and we don't think of it that way. So that's what I've been really working on. And I would encourage you all to do that. So for example, if your goal right now is to do a search fund, I know Dodson, I think, came on this program a while back. If that's your goal, how much of your calendar are you devoting to that goal? And my guess is you'll have that as a goal and it'll be 0, and you're wondering why it's not happening. So anyway, that would be, and so what happens, sorry, I'll just spend one more time on this, on the calendar, is it's the classic kind of urgent versus important. So the urgent stuff gets on our calendar and the important stuff doesn't, so that would be my thought. On what we look for when we hire, we're kind of looking for IQ, EQ, and AQ and IQ is just, intellectual horsepower. EQ is the ability to get along with other people, to have some self-awareness. And then AQ is adversity quotient. So ability to just drive through obstacles and, get back up after failure, those kinds of things. And what that, the term that we use is we use this will to win. And, when you have an interview with someone, it can come across whether they were a dance champion, whether they were in the military, whether they were just great at academics or whatever. It's not, for us, at least at Alpine, it's not really important how or in what way they exhibited those characteristics, but really that they have those characteristics. So to answer your question of how you would show that to an employer, I would probably be, somewhat, well, I'll digress for 1 second on kind of an interview, and I don't know if that's where you're going, but if I were interviewing for a job, I would make a list of, here are the 5 points I want to make about Graham Weaver. I want to make a point that I'm fucking crazy focused, that I have a will to win and I'm never going to lose, and I'm going to run through walls, that I'm that I've, succeeded in everything I've taken on, whatever, I make my list. Then I'd make what's called a defense list. What are all the reasons someone would not want to hire Graham Weaver, And for you all, maybe I haven't worked in the private sector yet, maybe I'm, not the exact prototype of someone in this role or whatever it is. So you make a defense deck, and then your job is to generate examples in your life to support those points on both sides. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're reading off that list, but when someone asks you, why should you work here? You have stories you can go to, and you have the points you're trying to make and the points you need to overcome. Keep in mind, they may not ask you the things on the defense list. It may just be a really happy interview, and then they come back and say, oh, you didn't get the job because you don't have enough experience. So you have to sometimes proactively bring up the defense list deck, which is counterintuitive, but I think it's really important so that they don't get back behind closed doors and say, I can't hire Alex because he's never worked in this business anymore. You should say, you're probably wondering why you should hire me, even though I've never been in this business before. Boom, Yep. And then you have to go right at those objections. So I know I hopefully that helped.
I wonder if we could maybe use this time to focus on Alex and Zach in particular, of like, can you kind of coach them on just where are you at in life? What do you want? And then kind of stress test what they want to see, because I think where they're at, this is
all right.
Who's going to start, Alex or Zach?
Yeah, go for it. Put me on the spot. Let's do it.
All right, Alex.
I was going to say, Jordan already got my spot out of one of the last calls. So Alex, you're up.
Yeah, cool. Thanks,
all right,
guys.
Alex. So what was your answer when I went through that Genie exercise? What was the first kind of thing that came to mind for you?
Yeah, so you talk about the Genie exercise and where I want to be in 5 years, right? And to give you a little backstory, as all of us who are veterans can attest to, we had unbelievable experiences, right? I'll say like one of the most incredible experiences I had was being over Syria in 2017, dropping a 1,000-pound weapon danger close to friendly forces to help them on the fight on the ground, right? I've done incredible things. I've landed on an aircraft carrier at night with pitching deck in some of the worst weather I could possibly describe. But the most rewarding thing to date I have ever done, inclusive of all of that, is convince a 23-year-old sailor on a flight deck that was 150 degrees that what he was doing mattered just as much as what I was doing. So to tie that in, 5 years from now, I want to be in a position where I can empower the men and women that I work with and give them all of the tools and resources they need to go execute the mission that is the overall focus of that company. Again, so really, like, where do I want to be? I want to be in a leadership role on the operational side of things, and I want to be able to make a difference. I hope that answers the question.
So, yeah, Alex, it's an awesome answer. You have clarity. To me, it sounds like you have super clarity, and you also have a really powerful why behind that. And so, I love it. And I think, just without knowing you that well, that would be really rewarding, for you to do that. So I love it. And that's fantastic. And I like how you talked about the most rewarding experience with the 23-year-old. That's really, really cool. So the question is, that's where you want to go. So your job now is to take a step in that direction, to move toward that goal. The reason I say that is doing, and I'm not, I know I'm sounding like I'm picking on investment banking, but doing investment banking just for 2 years is not moving you in that direction. Now you'd say, well, it is because it's going to be financial freedom. Well, everything you do is going to give you some money. And so you want to have the next, it's like, if I want to walk from here to, New York, I need to know where New York is. I need to step toward New York in that direction, right? So that's your job, is to take some steps in that direction. So what could that look like? It could look like taking on an operational role at a company. It could look like raising a search fund. It could look like the program that I described at Alpine Investors. It could look like trying to find a really successful CEO that you admire and reaching out and trying to, whatever, become their chief of staff, or, but spending your energy moving that way, okay, and kind of putting blinders on and letting all the other stuff that's coming in just letting it go, because keep your eyes on that sort of 5-year prize. And that's where we get lost. And I did the same thing, by the way. I graduated from business school. I knew I wanted to start my own company. I knew what kind of culture I wanted, blah, blah, blah. And I took a job doing something else because I kind of chickened out, and there were all these things coming at me, and I was like, okay, so I get it. It's hard, but I would just say stay the course on that. But I love that you sound like you have a lot of clarity on what you want to do, Alex.
Well, thanks, Graham. Thanks for putting me on the hot seat there.
Do it every call. Happy to do. Zach, over to you.
Yeah,
Zach, my question is why do you want to do banking? Why do you want to go into private? What is your why? And let's
my why is, in all reality, and Graham, this is great to have on a call with you, because I obviously I haven't been in the banking industry. I don't know a ton about it. I'm not very intimate with it. Like I've actually been a part of it, right? I know through others' experiences like yours. I do know that I have sort of the mentality of, hey, I'd rather, like sort of what you alluded to, I'd rather spend those, 2, 3, whatever years in the industry I want to get into, paying the proverbial man and working my tail off in that industry, heading down the direction I want to head down, as opposed to, one that's over here that I'm later going to have to course correct and get my foot in that industry regardless. Granted, that transition will inherently be easier, but it just makes more sense for me. Like, let me work 80-hour weeks in the private equity industry for a firm, as opposed to in a different industry and then trying to translate over later. In all reality, if I had the proverbial genie in a bottle, reality, it would be similar to where you're sitting, running a successful firm, not only from the, talent aspect, but, just all the facets that go into that fascinate me. What happened that put me down that route was, prior to going to Anderson, I thought, hey, I need to get some experience, in business, and what better way than just buying a business. So I sourced, did the due diligence process, did the whole gamut to find a business. And I knew the kind of like the gym industry, similar to sort of how you are. It was something I was very comfortable with, low barrier entry, low risk for me. So I just went and bought a business locally here in San Diego, and LBO'd it, owner financed it, and ran it. Still currently am running it. Thoroughly enjoyed the process. And that's sort of what led me to having an interest in private equity. So if my goal is, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, running my own firm, and similar to how you are, like, there's a bunch of different avenues to that. And I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So, I think it's awesome that you have energy for that, and that's where you want to head. And so then the question would be like, what's the step to go in that direction? The reason, again, if you want to stick on banking specifically, my question there is like, do you want to be like, when I was in banking, I would look at my boss and my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss. And frankly, they were more miserable than I was. The only people more miserable than me was the people that were older than me and doing the same thing. So, it wasn't the trajectory that I wanted to be in. And that's a good, by the way, that's a good way to say, like, if I start here and I'm like, God forbid I'm successful, which you, by the way, you will be, like, what's the payoff there? So for you, I mean, then maybe your path is to, look at options in private equity and what kind of firms could you work at right out of school. And I know that it's funny, banking will pitch themselves as, hey, we have lots of good exit opportunities, you can go here and people go here, but all they're saying really is everyone leaves banking. So therefore we have a lot of data points of people leaving banking. What if you pick something that people don't leave and, did that instead? And it's going to be harder to get that job. It's going to take more work on your part, more reaching out, more, networking or informational interviews or cold emails or warm emails or whatever. But, it's worth it because you can, save yourself a lot of time. by not feeling like you got to kind of put your time in for 2 years and then do what you want to do. But it's harder. It is harder. I definitely hear you that it's harder than finding a job in banking.
Zach, I want to dig a little more deeper into that. Like, why do that? I mean, you already bought a business and you're super entrepreneurial. Like, why not just keep on going down that path instead of working for somebody else? Like, what does that look like in 5 years versus you just going down the entrepreneurial path for 5 more years?
Yeah, I mean, in all reality, and I've had people that are friends that have made that transition and say, hey, like, why not take what you did and just replicate it and make it a little bit bigger and more of it? Like, well, that's an interesting question. I think private equity is just because it's a bigger game, right? It's like me, doing club rowing versus, at a collegiate, national championship rowing team. Like, it's that
Graham,
next
how
scale
happier
up.
do you think you are? How much happiness do you think you have more than someone who is a fundless sponsor or an independent sponsor and they're doing a couple of deals? Let's take the money out of it. They say that you have, making good money. How much happier do you think you are as a result of a bigger firm, a bigger fund?
Yeah, I think it's a good thread to go down, Jordan, and for your sake, Zach. And I would almost put the search fund and fundless sponsor kind of in that same bucket, just for the sake of this discussion. Put those kind of in one bucket, and then sort of going somewhere a little bit more institutional in the other bucket. I started as a fundless sponsor. I did 6 deals as a fundless sponsor, like you're doing, Zach, and that was kind of my track to start Alpine, was building a track record doing those deals, and then raising money to do it in a fund. What the benefits of, there are benefits on both sides. The benefit of probably the biggest benefit of the path I have now is I have partners. I have people I can bounce. It's not as lonely. I have people that have different skill sets than I do. I can bounce ideas off of. And I put a lot of weight on that. So you don't need to join a firm for that. But I would ask you that, Zach. Is there a way you could find either people who know how to do things you don't know, mentors, people who have a different set of skills, maybe really hardcore gym operator type people or finance people, or things that you can supplement yourself with, maybe on your advisory board or in your investor group, or could you have coaches or folks that you could talk to? Because that was the biggest thing when I was a fundless sponsor. Is it was lonely, but B, I also just didn't make as good of decisions, and I wasn't as effective because I just didn't have that kind of group of people to bounce ideas off of. And so I did some dumb things. So the biggest happiness thing, Jordan, for me today versus me back then is what I just said. I've got such a wonderful group of partners and folks to talk to, and that like really makes it a lot of fun. So Zach, you don't need to join a firm to get that. You could probably replicate that in your own organization.
Totally. And I think that's a big part of it for me as well, is that problem solving aspect, and doing it in a group of guys or women as well, people that you work with, right, that you enjoy and you thoroughly get a lot out of working together. It sounds like that's how you are. But it's also, and nothing against search funding at all, because I love that model and that approach. But I also like the idea of it not just being necessarily one vein of industry or one company. And that's, I think, what's sort of pushing me down the private equity route is, you're running a portfolio of companies. So you're dealing with different problem sets and different angles. And I think that also intrigues me a lot. I think that's really why private equity, as opposed to just replicating the model that I've done so far.
Yeah. And what I would just say about that is just private equity is a very broad industry. So like, I'll tell you what was not sexy about private equity was like, sort of when I was in the middle ranks. So Alpine was the 5th private equity firm I've worked at. And Alpine's the firm that I run now, but I was at 4 firms previously, and like there's this whole middle area where you're kind of negotiating, reps and warranties and escrows and indemnities and legal agreements, and and like it's kind of soul crushing, So again, just when you are considering where you're going, like actually be clear about what does this job entail? What are you doing? What's your role? Like I was so far away from boards and operating, and that I was and meanwhile, there's other firms that are a lot like our firm is, just a lot more operationally and focused and, whatever. So, just, they're not all the same either. So you might have a lot of fun. You might also find it, find it really tough depending on, how the firm is structured and what your role is.
Yeah, totally. And especially different markets, like lower middle is obviously very different from bulge bracket. So thanks,
Come on,
Graham. I
dive
really
deeper into that
appreciate it.
of like, are you happy that the thing you have built is a thing that invests in other things and grows those things, as opposed to conceptually, there's a big problem that has to be solved by technology thing. And so my thing is going to be building a company that solves that. I just said thing way too much.
I'll tell you what, I don't know if it falls in one of these buckets, Jordan, but the thing that I'm the proudest of is that we hire people with incredible values and that I like and trust and admire, and we give them an opportunity to go build incredible things. And then what they do is they build companies that have great cultures and they empower people. And so, 70%, I mentioned earlier, 70% of people hate their jobs. In our companies, we measure engagement, net promoter score. And, it's kind of the flip of that. 70% of people are really fired up to be there. So the thing I'm proudest of is probably, Alec, what you mentioned, or what you're proudest of is I have the exact same answer that you have. Your answer was the, 22 or 23-year-old that felt like, his job and his life mattered. That's probably the thing that I'm proudest of at what I've created is hopefully I've created a organization that's capable of doing that kind of on a larger scale. And it really is where I have the most energy, and it's amazing to see.
So maybe it's kind of taking us home. Like, what is your message to the transitioning veteran, or kind of anybody who's stuck in the career and doesn't know what the hell to do next? What is the first set of questions that they should be thinking about to get a higher definition of what that future could look like?
It's kind of what we talked about, Jordan, but I'll say it just kind of directly. And again, is, ask yourself what you would do if you knew you were going to be successful. Start there, because you will be. If you have single-minded purpose behind your your goal, you will get there. So ask yourself, where do I want to get? What would that look like? So let go of how. Okay, there's a good coaching quote, which is the how is the killer of all great dreams. So let go of how and just figure out what it really is that you want. That's why we did that genie exercise earlier in this call. What is that? And then start working toward that, as opposed to, and that's kind of like, maybe that's 5 years from now where you want to go, as opposed to what's the optimal solution for me in the next month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, because the answers are almost always really different. And 1 month or 2 months, it's going to lead to a place you don't want to be, by definition. So that would be my biggest thing. And then the last thing I would just say along the same lines is just have confidence. Don't underestimate yourselves. Like I know that if I were a vet, I would probably have this at least thought cross my mind, say, gosh, I haven't been in the private sector or ever, or maybe for a while, and there's all this stuff I don't know. But don't underestimate yourselves. And like the same character traits that have gotten you success in what you've done, your leadership, your courage, your intensity, your focus, your persistence, your grit, your toughness, all those things, you get to keep those. Those get transported to your next thing. And even if the next thing is something you haven't done, you get to bring you and all your greatness to that thing. And so, just don't underestimate yourselves. You can start from scratch. And our experience is, you get up the learning curve really, really fast. And then those attributes really carry you after that. So that would be my biggest message, is figure out what you want, and then don't sell yourself short. And I always say to my students, like, the punchline here is, you are the genie, and you do have the power to give yourself that wish. And I've given myself that wish my entire career, and I can't think of a single time when it didn't come through or come pretty damn close to exactly what I set out.
Well, if you have time for one more, Monarch has a question. Is that all right? Or do you need to bounce quick?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Graham, in all of our different experiences, the different places we were in the military, dealing with other folks, kind of personal challenges that we find, sometimes we find failure in interpersonal situations, privately for ourselves, and that's kind of some of the best learning and best experiences that we can get to either not do that again or grow because of that. And just curious, with your experience at Alpine, kind of what were your biggest lessons learned from some of your difficulties or failures there?
Oh gosh, I mean, so many. We lost money on 5 of my first 8 investments. The lesson there would have been, have better mentors, I gave you this earlier, have better people to bounce ideas off of, have a better group of decision makers process. We sometimes took shortcuts, and we did a deal where, maybe we didn't have the alignment with the entrepreneur. He or she didn't have the same values as us. And we said, well, it's a great deal and it's at a good price and whatever. And that very rarely works out well. And even if it does, it's not even worth it. Honestly, life's too short. Buffett says, working with someone you don't admire is like marrying for money. He says it's a bad idea under most circumstances, but totally insane if you're already rich. So I learned that, which is like, here's the crazy thing, working with the people that you love and trust and admire, it actually turns out it's more fun and it's way more profitable. So I learned that lesson. Probably the biggest one of all, if I had to kind of put a wrapper on it, well, I can't say one, but I said a couple of them, all of our outcomes come through talent. That's been a big lesson. But probably the biggest one for me personally is just the power of like faith. And I don't mean just like religious faith, but just like faith that it was going to work out, and like taking a leap sometimes when I didn't know exactly what was on the other side. I've done that throughout my life, and just kind of taken that step without having the like clarity on where it was going, and then bringing, like I said earlier, bringing myself fully to that. And it's just always worked out, and I don't mean it's worked out like it's been an easy ride. It hasn't. It's been a hellacious ride at times. I mean, the Great Recession, I've drained my bank account twice to make payroll, and there's been some hard times, but I think if you give yourself enough time, and you're really excited about where you're headed, my money is on you to make it happen. And anyway, I'm really honored to have been given this chance to talk to you all. And I feel free to reach out. You know where to find me, and we'd certainly love to talk to any of you about your next steps. And Jordan, thanks so much for reaching out.
Awesome, guys. This is awesome. Thanks so much. See you later.
Graham.
Thank you so much, Graham.
appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Take care.